Well, Timothy O'Malley joins us via Skype from his campus of the University of Notre Dame to talk about this book that Bishop is holding right now on the topic of dating and marriage in the hookup world. Thank you so much for being with us. How are you today?
Oh, it's great. It's great to join you after a Patriots win.
Hey, listen, Notre Dame gets a lot of wins, too.
Well, sometimes, but I lived in Boston for 4 years, and so I'm one of the few people out in Indiana who root for the Patriots at all.
Well, you have to be a little quiet about that. Sometimes that doesn't go over quite as well.
It's very unpopular.
Hey, tell us about the hookup culture and how it affects people.
Sure, yeah, I work with, this book arose from my work with undergraduates. I teach a big class at Notre Dame with 150 undergraduates per semester on the Sacrament of Marriage. And one of the things that, one of the reasons I began to teach the course was the effects of what a hookup culture is. Hookup is an ambiguous term that could be anything from engaging in sort of sexual activity right after meeting someone to sort of making out in a corner. But the point is it's ambiguous, and the intention of it is in essence to have an encounter where you don't actually have to communicate anything sort of intimate with one another, no actual details, names, friendship. You don't deal with the person flesh to flesh in their reality. And so particularly among emerging adults or young adults, this is a norm of how relationships develop now. It's this culture where the first encounter will be something that's sexual rather than even asking something like, well, what's your name?
Tim, we're so happy you're with us today and that you can share this great message. You know, I'm looking around the studio here. I'm looking at Jay and Kevin and Brian and Bonnie, all married. I have the greatest respect for people who live out the sacrament of marriage. But you say that the sacrament of marriage can heal the culture. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think one of the things I've discovered is that at the heart of the hookup culture, it's not just a kind of desire for sex, right? It actually is a fear of communion. And I think one of the things that the Sacrament of Marriage does is it does two things. At a very natural level, it says, you know, you take a vow and you let a sort of communion that's from outside of you sort of establish the relationship, right? So when I said to my wife, I Tim, take you care to be my wife, I promise to be faithful to you or true to you in good times and bad, in sickness and in health. I will love you and honor you all the days of my life. A sort of communion is established, a bond that transcends my individual affections, my desires, what I feel. It's something that's real. And second, you know, in the church, we really think that that's an establishment of a love that's Christ's own love. And so that there's a communion expressed over the course of the lifetime in which marriage, in its most mundane dimension, it kind of transforms this desire for a kind of anonymous encounter. It's something that's real. You have to know something about a person, and it's sort of Christ's own love that sort of establishes this bond.
What's the reaction been of the students? I'm sure some of them must come up to you after class. Do any of them argue with you? Do any of them say thank you? What do you get? What are you hearing?
Many of my students are shocked that I know what's going on. I think often in sort of cultures, they presume that the adults are not paying attention. And so, yeah, I mean, I think they're sometimes grateful. Some of them argue. I find actually most young people are not interested in participating within the culture. Whether I'm teaching at Notre Dame or I was just in the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C. last week giving a similar talk, most don't want this, but they feel sort of pushed into it because of a cultural script that's just prevalent no matter what they watch on TV, the kind of media they consume. They just presume this is normal. And so what they're really interested in is communion and not this sort of quick, random hookup.
I have to ask you now, would people be surprised? Your students certainly have a better sense of the hookup world, if you will. Would people, our listeners, be surprised to learn that this culture is so pervasive?
Yes. Yeah, it is pretty pervasive. I think it is surprising. I think a lot of people, the way that I sort of always begin when I talk to older groups is, you know, when I was in youth ministry as a high school student in East Tennessee, you know, our conversations involved things like premarital sex. And it was sort of the discussion of, would you have sex before you were married with someone that you really loved? That's not even sort of a conversation that goes on anymore. It's, would you actually know the last name of the person you had sex with. And so I think in a lot of ways it is not well known because it involves participation in a youth culture that I think a lot of priests, deacons, bishops, those in ministry aren't sort of really paying attention to. The landscape has changed dramatically within the last 8 to 10 years, partially because of electronic dating, because of online apps like Tinder. It's changed the way that Americans meet and mate.
Well, where can people get a copy of the book, Off the Hook, Timothy?
You can get it at Ave Maria Press, or you can sort of get it at that behemoth Amazon.
Well, Timothy, thank you so much for being with us. And listen, just stay low with that whole Patriots thing, and you'll be okay.
Great. I'll take down the banner.
Have a great day.